Alright, so this one going to be about 40k game again. We played on Saturday, because it wasn't really a normal session. It was still more prep and kind of figuring out the system. Because last time we mostly built out our characters, and this time we're just kind of double checking them and going over how the system works. We did a few like test rounds of combat, test situations, that kind of thing. It's another one of those systems where like combat and non-combat essentially work the same. Almost everything is just a skill test, which is just you roll a D100 against the whatever relevant skill, and if you roll under your skill, then you win. And there's some funny business with contested rolls, which is interesting, but that's mostly all you do in the game. That's like the only thing you do, skill test, which is fine. That's essentially all D&D really does anyway. There's some nuances in Deathwatch you roll under, and it's a D100, and whereas in D&D it's you have a bonus, and you're trying to roll over a DC. You're still just rolling for stuff, which that's like the core of any TTRPG. You roll dice to see what happens. But that's not really what I wanted to talk about. I like the system overall so far. But one of the quirks that I've noticed is the classes, or as the game calls them, specialties, are, I feel, very restrictive in what they do. And on top of that, there's only 6 of them. I think 6. Maybe 7? Apothecary, Assault, Devastator, Library, Apothecary, Assault, Devastator, Librarian, Tac, Tech Marine. Yeah, it's like 6. So it's fairly restrictive in these class choices, because there's not a lot of classes, and because each, there's a general talent and skill tree menu that you can choose from, but there's a lot that is determined entirely by your specialty. For instance, what it costs to change your stats or improve your stats, and there are a lot of skills and talents you can only get from a specialty. And so, that kind of makes sense, right? Like, each of these specialties has to have a real identity, and that does make sense. But like, if you have a particular idea for a character, like, I in particular did feel pigeonholed to go with Assault, because I wanted to do a 2-weapon wielding, 2 lightning claws kind of character. And in our first version of this game, where we were playing that hack of 5e, my character was much more of a stealth-focused skirmisher that also had some tech ability, so there was some preconceived notions in there. But moving to this system, a lot of those notions don't work, because I had to choose what's the most important parts of this character, and I determined it's the one, I could grab the 2 lightning claws, physical skirmisher type, and the only place to get 2-weapon wielder is in the Assault class. That's the only specialty that has that as a capability. That's it. Only spot you can get it. Later on, Tactical can get 2-weapon wielder with firearms, but not with melee attacks. Which, I get in some ways it can make sense, but theoretically, I would have gone for Tech Marine, but Tech Marine doesn't get this either. I think there are ways you can, like, not multi-class, but ways you can get talents from other classes at, like, a premium, but I'm not sure how to do it. I didn't look into it too hard, you know. Which there are some other things I would have theoretically gotten, but again, we're not that well versed in the system, so doing that kind of hybrid character building is I think a little beyond us at the moment. But so got to go with Assault class for this character. He wasn't designed with a kind of jetpack style, with the jump pack. He was designed with like a bunch of mechadendrite tentacles that he uses to interact with machinery and kind of pull himself around and climb and stuff, but not with a jetpack. So the Assault comes with some special abilities that that give you some jetpack bonuses. You can charge into a horde in a specific way, and you can use the jump pack to move around and stuff. But overall, that's a lot of what you get up front. So you are kind of... I've been trying to think of ways to like pigeonhole it, or not pigeonhole it, to reflavor it. It's like nothing I come up with is really super satisfying beyond just like, oh, you use the tentacles to do this effect. And it's like, yeah, that can work. But I don't know. I think I'm okay with switching to a kind of jetpack. But, you know. But the point is, kind of pigeonholed into that and into using the Assault if I wanted to keep that as 2-weapon wielder. Because while I could grab that just 2-weapon wielder, there's a bunch of other talents that the Assault gets that support this kind of 2-weapon fighting style that only the Assault actually gets. So, you know, maybe I'll look into a little bit of Tech Marine stuff, like a way to get at least one mechadendrite so I can have a single tentacle that just like, you know, types on keyboards for me. But it's also not the most important thing in the world about this character. But then how do you do stealth stuff? And all of that is tied up in chapter, which is like a background feature of the character. Only the Raven Guard and I guess technically the Night Lords get that as a capability. You know, the ability to stealth without incurring big penalties, which is funny because the first stealth roll I made, I've flubbed terribly, even though I had massive bonuses to it. So, you know, that's the only way to really do stealth, but there's nothing else in the specialties that really support a stealth kind of playstyle. Like, of the 6 specialties, none of them are stealth. And the main reason I'm kind of talking about this is, while this is, I think, more of a game design contrivance, because one of the main things about 40K and about Space Marines is that Space Marines are generalists across the board. They're supposed to be capable of basically any kind of fighting style that their chapter might need them to do. And that's kind of how they're taught. They move up through different companies and learn different skill sets as they go until eventually they're just like a normal baseline battle brother, and you can kind of slot them in depending on what's needed. Like, oh, we got this mission where we got to assassinate this guy. Here's a sniper rifle. Oh, we've got a frontline assault kind of mission where we're attacking an entrenched enemy. Here's a jetpack. Here's a jump pack for you to jump in behind enemy lines or whatever. You know, and they're all capable of doing this, but that's not what the game the game supports. And of course that makes sense, because if you just had the ability to wildly redesign your character, like swap out everything all at once at the beginning of a mission, this shit would take way too long. So, and it's also like, even with that, everybody learns the baseline. A lot of Space Marines kind of end up with like a favorite a favorite combat style, and individual chapters have their own combat doctrines. Like the Raven Guard are basically always using jump packs and stealth and claws to get in and rip shit up. And then they also have some stealth guys that are using long-range sniper rifles and stuff. Then you've got like the Mantis Warriors that are kind of doing the same thing, but they favor that longer range stealth combat style. And then you've got like the Blood Angels that also favor jump packs, but they're just jumping right at you. They're just jumping at your face because they're the premier melee boys. But then you've got chapters like the Ultramarines that are just whatever this particular battle needs, that's what we're going to do. They're like, super adaptable, whatever. The Dark Angels kind of do the same thing, but they do it in a little differently. They've got individual companies that have their own individual specialties, or at least they were when they were a Legion. I don't know exactly how it works now that they're not a Legion, but not important. So I think I'm not even sure. I mean, that's not a problem. It's just kind of a observation, I guess. I do think, and especially now, the idea of like more stealth-focused Marines is less of an afterthought now, because I think it used to be only certain chapters could do it, but now it's like, in the era of Primaris, it's like more common in general that you have one or two squads that are all stealth-focused in any given chapter. So I think if the Deathwatch RPG were written today, there'd probably be like 8 specialties instead. One of them would be probably not Scout. I think calling it Sniper, just like Space Marine 2 does, I think that works, even though a Sniper typically invokes a sniper rifle. It's really just about like a skirmisher style, where you use stealth to get into position, whether that's, a high vantage or a good vantage to see enemies at a distance and pick them off, or into close range where you can tear the shit out of them with a bunch of melee weapons and then disappear. Either one. But like, you can do that second one with assault, but you can't really do the first one, more or less. I mean, well, you kind of can, but it's more so this would be a specialty built with like stealth, like a stealth ability built in instead of just something else. But anyway, I never button this. And then something else, there's like in Space Marine 2, and this is because Space Marine 2 is my biggest window into 40K. Those classes, the character classes you get in Space Marine 2, are very different than the specialties in Deathwatch. Because in Deathwatch, like I said, you get Apothecary, you get Assault, you get Devastator, you get Librarian, you get TAC, and Tech Marine. Whereas in Space Marine 2, you get TAC, you get Assault, you get Vanguard, Bulwark, Sniper, Heavy, and Tech Marine. And theoretically, well, Sniper and Vanguard are specifically Primaris units. They are very recent. They use a particular light armor pattern that offers a little less protection than the standard armor pattern. but they get better stealth and mobility. So one, those two options just don't exist when Deathwatch was written. Attack is there. Bulwark and heavy. Heavy is essentially just Devastator. You get the big boy weapons, and you get slightly heavier armor patterns. Bulwark also doesn't exist. It's a heavier armor pattern, but it's more melee focused. They get a big storm shield. They get, a variety of melee weapons, and more importantly, they don't have a primary weapon, which is, they don't have like a rifle. They just have a handgun and a melee weapon. So what does that mean? Well, you can't really build that directly in Deathwatch. I guess you could build a tech marine or a tactical, and then just slap a storm shield on him and do one or two other things, get as many melee bonuses as you can. But that's kind of it. There's no bulwark character class or specialty, which is like, a heavy melee unit that's focused, that doesn't have crazy mobility and is focused more on area control, I guess. Something like that. That's not a specialty. Assault, tactical, heavy, those do exist essentially in Deathwatch, but in Space Marine there's no two-weapon fighting. There's nothing of that, nothing like that. Because it's a video game, it's built very differently. And then you got Tech Marine added later. But as far as I can tell in Deathwatch, Tech Marine is much more about having some versatility because you've got essentially extra limbs to do stuff with, and you're much more about repairing vehicles, repairing equipment in general, setting up fortifications, that kind of thing. Maybe disabling enemy tech, but that's kind of it. So I don't know. I just always find it interesting, the contrivance different games have to make. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of these kinds of things that overall you just have to make some kind of decision, and there's always going to be some compromise you have to make when you're designing a game like this. So, that's it. That's all I got for you today.